Hello and welcome to the Love, Peace, Truth, Karma podcast. I'm your host, Leanne Brown, and today I've got an extra special treat for you. One incredible, inspirational woman who has shown such courage and stepping out and speaking up for those who are vulnerable and don't have a voice of their own. It is the amazing Maggie Oliver. She is ex-detective. She's an author. She's of the book Survivors, a speaker, and also the founder of the amazing Maggie Oliver Foundation. So I hope you enjoy this week's podcast.
If you're in China, you just know it's corrupt. They want it to be like that here.
People are pretending to be 12-year-old kids, mate, and they're not.
Yeah.
They're 40-year-old men.
Now we're getting bombarded with all these death numbers, but there's no context there.
He'd got one child pregnant, he'd raped many others, and we had evidence to prove that.
Do you think evil still exists today as it did back then? And the answer should very simply be yes.
Maggie, thank you so much for coming. I'm so glad that we ended up getting acquainted in 2019, was it?
Yeah, it was.
We have such similar values with empowering women, giving those a voice that really just struggle to have one and are like silenced. And that has been such a courageous thing that you did, really stepping up and trying to help the three girls. I mean, most people will know you for your for the story when you was a detective in the police force, trying to give them poor girls a voice. And what I really wanted to talk about your whole story, the foundation, where you're at with it, and also the corruption that is rife within the system.
Yeah.
And this podcast that I've wanted to do is called Love, Peace, Truth, Karma, because it's about speaking about the corruption, speaking about through the government, through the police, through the censorship. I mean, I've just had my account, my Instagram account, as we were just saying, disabled, with over 240,000 followers, which has been a real blow to me. Like this weekend, there was the protest march, and which I attended. And at first I thought maybe it's just because they're trying to make sure I don't post anything. I had no warning. And being sort of having that status on there, I know how it feels to kind of be standing up and speaking out, because there's not many people in the public eye that have been doing it. And yourself knows exactly what that feels like. So just tell us about a bit about the story, for those that haven't heard about how courageous you were and what happened.
I mean, there are a lot of similarities with what you're saying. And obviously we live in this world now of COVID.
Yeah.
And there's barely a conversation that doesn't contain a conversation about COVID. Yeah. But really, the similarities are really unavoidable. Because for anybody who is speaking out about the way that the pandemic has been managed and the alternative views to what should be done, like you are standing up against a very powerful body of people, more powerful in many respects than what I stood up against. But, I was a serving police officer, and I loved my job. And when I joined the police, I was 41. I was, unusual in that I'd got 4 kids. I see myself as just an ordinary mum. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to, stand up for victims and put the bad guys away. I actually initially wanted to go into child protection, but very quickly realised when I'd spent a couple of months in there, or 6 months in there, that social workers really deal with the victims. As a police officer working in child protection, you interview your victim or your witness, but then you are focused on the offender. My skills were always with victims, with children, with vulnerable people, and I loved that, and I was really good at it. Because I was a bit of a square peg in a round hole. Coming to the police at 41 is unusual.
Yeah. How was that?
difficult.
Yeah, surrounded by a lot of males.
Yeah, very much a male, a male-driven organisation. The older you get, the more set in your ways you become. I had a very well-developed sense of what was right and wrong, even when I joined the police. I didn't like conflict, and actually, anybody listening will be surprised to know that my areas for development when I went in the police were always dealing with conflict. Well, they obviously did a bloody good job, because I have had more conflict in the last 10 years.
Preparation.
They were training me to take on what I've taken on. But I found the old boys network very difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
Very
cliquey.
Yeah. A rank-driven organisation that if you challenge, the attitude always was, these supervisors, these are, they have rank, you do as you're told. And in fact, when I was leaving the police, that was said to me that, as a police officer, as a detective constable, it's your job to do as you're told. It's the job of senior officers to make the decisions. And if you can't do that, if you can't follow orders, then maybe you're in the wrong job. And I was in the wrong job, because I don't believe that for 1 minute. I believe in listening to people. That's the only way you reach the right conclusions, because everybody has got an opinion, a voice, and it's by allowing those voices to be heard that you come out with the best results. So right from the start, I always had a slightly different take on things. I'd got 4 kids of my own. I was posted to Moss Side. So straight away it was all, and it was in the 90s, the late 90s. It was guns and gangs, but we had the universities on us. We had the MRI. There was a lot of drug abuse. But I, because you get a drunken student who maybe gets into a bit of mither, you can criminalise that person for the rest of their life by dealing with it
the wrong way. So I always tried to look at the bigger picture. I remember one case, one job that we had the big Asda supermarket on my patch in Hume, and as a uniform officer, I remember being sent to Asda, and there were 4 kids, 10, 11-year-old lads who would actually pinched a sausage roll and eaten it walking around the supermarket. Yeah, God, I might have done that myself.
Me
Crab
too.
sticks and stuff,
But there was a policy there that you arrest everybody.
Right.
So I was sent to deal with that job. So I went along and I thought, 4 little kids, 1 sausage roll.
Yeah.
You arrest them, you need 4 vans. You need 4 van crews. You need 4 appropriate adults. You need 4 solicitors. You need a custody office. For a 60p sausage roll, get the mothers in.
Yeah.
Get them to pay for the sausage roll and give them a proper going over.
Yeah.
I was like, hold before the chief inspector, not threatened, but, got torn off a strip. This isn't, you're not allowed to do this, that we have a policy of, and
use your common sense.
Yeah. And I said, well, if the public knew you were going to throw a few £1,000s at a sausage roll. That kind of is how I was. But because of that, Leanne, immediately out of my probation, I was called in by the superintendent at Moss Side, who was I thought he was a very decent bloke. And we had a big gang job. And there was a big family living in one house, actually a Pakistani family, and one of the lads was an eyewitness to a murder, a big, a brutal case, and GMP's force witness protection unit would only rehouse the key witness and his uncle, but there was a mum, a dad, and 5 kids also living in that house. So the super asked me, would I take on that side of the family and relocate them and find them a new school and move them to a different area?
Right.
No training, 2 years in the job, but I did it.
Yeah.
And I loved it.
Yeah.
And that was my introduction to serious crime. And I never went back to uniform.
Right.
You know, I became a family liaison officer. I went in CID. And then in 2000, I think it was the end of 2003, my husband, Norman, he had been diagnosed terminally ill at that point with bowel cancer. And we had a job break in which became known as Operation Augusta. And that was a case where we had dozens of children that were being groomed and sexually abused by gangs of Pakistani men. And I was asked to join a small team originally of 3 officers because we had a child who had died in Rochdale, a little girl called Victoria Golia, and she'd been groomed and abused and failed horrendously.
How old was she?
When she died, I think she was 15. Wow. But she'd been abused from being about 12, and she had a really tragic story. Her mum had died when she was about 8, and she was one of 5 siblings, and the kids had all been split up and put in care. And from being a really bubbly, happy child, she was passed from pillar to post. And actually, you know, the authorities knew that she was being groomed, knew that she was being abused, failed to protect her.
This is one thing that was so apparent in your book as well, how, you know, everyone's tarred with the same brush. And we know in life, you know, there's always a reason why children are naughty, and there's a reason why they go
100%.
off the rails, and there's trauma there. And
Yeah.
the fact that they're just not prepared to address that.
No.
And,
No.
they're from...
It was shocking. It
Yeah.
was really, and it shocked me, you know, and I was very naive then. I mean, I am a different person now than I was back in 2004.
Yeah.
Not because I've sought it out, because of what I've learned in those 15 years. And what I saw, we went from having, you know, Victoria's death to being on a very small team of 3 people. That over a period of 18 months, that investigation grew. We had a full major incident team. We had over 100 paedophiles on a database. We had about 3 dozen children at this, you know, that we knew were being abused. The last 2 months of Norman's life, I left that job to go and look after him. When I came back to work a couple of months later, that job had been completely buried. Not one prosecution.
Yeah.
All those men left to continue to abuse.
Wow.
And I couldn't get any answers, you know. I challenged it, but I was a detective. I wasn't a chief constable, quite naive, in a bad place myself, single parent, 4 children, you know, lost my husband that I'd been with 30 years. But I knew that was wrong. And it never left me. You know, I was unable to get answers. I was just told there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. I knew that was a lie. I knew that was wrong, but I couldn't do anything. And
what about the other people on the case? Were they
no,
straight on board with...
No, but you know, I know now there are a lot of good police officers, but there are very few that will go to the lengths that I have gone. I lost everything when I gave my job up. You know, I mean, obviously it was a few years after that.
Yeah.
But you don't take a decision like that lightly.
No.
And those good police officers in the end end up going to work, getting the wage and going home. You know, because to challenge an organisation like the police, as soon as you stick your neck above the parapet, you are a marked person.
I guess that's why we're in the situation we are with the police doing what they're doing, and people not being able to understand that.
Yeah.
They're just following orders, and that's where we're at, isn't it?
And that, you know, that there is, well, if I go back to Augusta, and I'll follow that thread through before I go on to anything else, but for 15 years, it never left me. And then when I resigned from the police, I was at liberty to talk about everything, even though I'd been frightened of, you know, going to prison, actually. But once I started to talk, once I'd made the decision to talk...
Did they threaten you?
Yeah.
To not talk?
Yeah.
Did you not have to sign anything to say that when you joined the police force?
Well, you do. Yes, you do, because you promise to uphold the law. you promise that you will act with integrity, that you will protect
it's your oath, isn't it?
It's your oath of attestation. And that's what I promised to do.
Yeah.
I didn't promise to do what those at the top tell me to do, whether that's right or wrong.
Yeah.
I promised to uphold the law. And what I saw over a period of, how many years? 8 or 9 years. Bit by bit, my trust in that organisation went. So there was Augusta, they buried that. And I knew it shouldn't have been buried. Mm-hmm. And I knew that those 100 men, which was the tip of the iceberg, I knew they would continue to abuse children. Then 5 years later, I went back, after Augusta and after Norman died, I went back to work and I went back into serious crime. I worked on murders, kidnappings. I stayed away from child protection because whereas I could maybe turn a blind eye to a theft from a motor vehicle if ordered to do so, or even a burglary, child abuse is so life-destroying that I would not stand by and allow that. So I knew that by being in child protection, if somebody said, oh, leave that, I couldn't. No. And I'd take it home with me at night. And
being a mother as well, it's that instinct, isn't it? Protection and
who's fighting
compassion.
For that child? You've got a 2-year-old there or a 5-year-old. And if you do something at the right time, you can change that child's life forever. Yeah. So whatever somebody said to me when it came to child protection, if I truly believed that what they were saying was wrong, I would not let it go. And that's just me. So I realised that to stay in a career like the police, I had to... working on murders, for me, it felt that the damage had been done. When I went on a murder, that person was already dead. Yeah. So I was trying to help the family or to find the bad guys. It didn't conflict with my conscience in any way. Yeah. So I stayed in serious crime until, and then in 2010, I got a phone call asking me to go and speak to senior bosses about a new job called Operation Span, which it turned out was identical to Operation Augusta. Gangs of Pakistani men, dozens of children, very vulnerable children.
Potentially the same group, was it?
There possibly were some overlaps because Victoria had died in Rochdale. This was a case in Rochdale. But the reality was that it was identical. If you lifted the Augusta, I did a report for Augusta that went to the gold group at GMP, so the chief constable, the assistant chief constables, head of serious crime. I sat there with them at Chester House explaining what was going on Augusta with a written report, and they agreed that it was a major incident and they resourced it with a full team. It was when I was off with Norman that they withdrew that and they closed the job down. I now know, because of the report last year that I was instrumental in bringing, it took 15 years, but that report officially acknowledged that GMP closed that job down because they were unwilling to put any resources into it. They knew. And now there are 5 senior officers that are referred to the IOPC for investigation about the failures. Wow. My opinion is that nothing will happen to them because none of them are ever held personally accountable. Yeah. And for me, that is one of the big issues. Without personal accountability, I don't think we're going to see changes because you've just seen with GMP, they're in special measures. Yeah. The previous chief constable, Ian Hopkins, he failed miserably. We had 80,000 victims of crime that didn't even have the crimes recorded last year.
I believe so. Nick Buckley saying that, they went for mayor and he spoke openly about that.
And that's true. They're in special measures. Yeah. There's a new chief constable in. Ian Hopkins has been allowed to walk out. He'll get a big pension. He's gone into another job. He won't be held accountable. And yet those decisions that he made are responsible for the consequences for those 80,000 victims and the rest.
80,000, it's not like...
In 1 year.
Even a couple of thousand. No. It's just mind-boggling.
So, it's repeating the same failures. So Augusta, there was all those victims, all those crimes. Operation Span, I agreed eventually to join it on the cast iron guarantee that there would not be a repeat of what happened on Augusta. And if anybody really wants to hear or read the full story, they really should read my book.
Yeah, Survivor.
Yeah,
It's a great
Survivors.
book, yeah.
Which I've tried to go into detail about the sequence of events.
Yeah.
I also was the program consultant for 3 Girls.
Yeah.
Which I always say is a drama because it was dramatised.
Yeah.
But it really explains what grooming is. I feel that in the drama, the police got an easy ride.
Yeah, of course.
I feel that the CPS...
Sourced from the same...
Yeah,
looking
because
after each
it was
other.
made by the BBC, but it's
Yeah.
a great drama.
Yeah.
But nothing has really changed.
Was there not 2 programmes done?
There was 3 Girls, which was the drama,
Yeah.
and then the documentary next to it was called The Betrayed Girls.
Right.
And that is that covers Augusta.
Okay.
It covers
Is that what you were involved in?
I was involved in that
Yeah.
as well. So the
Did you have
Betrayed
more
Girl-
input in that then? Was that still a BBC production or a
They were
different
both
one?
BBC,
Okay.
and I was involved with both. You know, the drama 3 Girls, I worked on it for 4 years and I brought everybody represented in that drama into the production. You know, I spent a year going out, persuading people to share their story with the team behind 3 Girls. And I think it is a great drama.
Yeah.
I think the problem is because I know every single nuance. I know those girls. I know what really happened. Probably nothing would have ever been enough for me.
No.
But I think it did a great job. If you can take the personalities out of it, you know, the character played by Maxine, that is an amalgamation of perhaps half a dozen different characters in that role. So it isn't a truthful portrayal of that character.
Yeah.
So the way they portrayed Amber, I have massive problems with, because she was demonised by the system, and it almost destroyed it. She's never recovered. Those girls have never recovered.
Yeah,
I was with one of them
say,
yesterday.
How are they now?
I was with one yesterday. I'm with another one all day tomorrow. So it's kind of, you know, when I went on Operation Span, and again, it's so complicated to go through. I spent 7 or 8 months doing hours and hours of interviews with Amber, with Ruby. And then 7 months later, after having cast iron guarantees that there would not be a repeat of what happened on Augusta, the powers that be changed their mind and decided they were not going to support, they were going to build the case around one victim. The other dozens of victims that we had were pretty much cast to the wind. And that's the second time I saw that happening. I couldn't believe it.
So so how many victims were there that was standing up and speaking out? Wow.
Dozens. There were dozens. Even at the start of Operation Span, the abuse, when OpSpan started in late 2010, the abuse had finished about 2 years before. The girls were no longer being abused. We went back to those children who were, some of them were 18, 19 by this time. Ruby wasn't, she was 15 still. Ruby had been made, just to simplify it, Ruby had been made pregnant by one of the abusers, who had been in his 40s, married, 3 children, and from the age of 12 he'd been abusing her. He'd got her pregnant when she was just 13. The police had seized that fetus when she went for a termination without consulting her.
Oh, I remember this.
Without telling her mum. When I was asked to join SPAN, one of the tasks I was asked to do was to go back to that family, to tell them we'd got a fetus, to get their consent to use it to get DNA, and to keep them on side to cooperate with the prosecution. I did that, despite the horror, because they couldn't, when I'm saying we've got a fetus that's been locked in a freezer in the police property system for 2 years, please will you sign this to let us, to their everlasting credit, for no benefit to themselves, they agreed. So when finally, and Ruby was interviewed, she gave her account, we had DNA, we had absolute proof who had got her pregnant, We had professional witnesses and people who had a file like that of what had happened to her. When the CPS and the chief prosecutor makes the decision that they're not even going to charge that man with rape.
Yes.
You know, he was charged with sexual activity with a child. He was out of prison in less than 4 years. She didn't know he was out of prison. Parole board never contacted her. Probation never got in touch with her.
Wow.
The first she knew, or I knew, that he was out of prison was when she bumped into him in the local Asda.
Yeah.
No, that for me is horrific.
Yeah.
And that is the contempt.
It's disgusting.
It's disgusting. And if that was your daughter or my daughter, they wouldn't do it. But because they think that these kids are an underclass, that they don't matter. It's not the chief constable's daughter. It's not Boris Johnson's daughter. Mm-hmm. This is a kid. And you know what? They don't matter. Well, they do matter.
Every child
They
matters.
do matter. And alongside that was her sister, Amber, in the drama, who had been arrested when she was 15 on suspicion of being a madam.
That's right.
She was a victim of the abuse.
Yeah.
She told me on months of interviews of dozens of men that raped her. The top lawyer, the head of the complex case unit, before I was allowed to speak to her, made a policy decision that even though she had been arrested 2 years previously, this child was a victim. She should not have been arrested.
No.
She should have been supported. And I was then told, please go and bring her on board, ask her to tell us what's happened. And again, she did. And then 6 or 7 months down the line, they changed their mind and they ultimately added her onto the indictment as one of the gang of abusers as a tactical option to get her evidence into court. They didn't tell her. They never arrested her. They never cautioned her. She never had legal representation. It was a gross abusive process.
Yeah.
And faced with those two things, I would not accept it again. And it made me really ill. And on the day they said to me, we've changed our mind about Amber, I exploded. And actually out of the whole drama, that scene is fairly indicative of what happened.
Yeah.
And I felt like punching somebody.
Yeah, I bet.
I was livid and I thought, this is not the job I promised to do.
No.
You know, we have a child here. We have dozens of children and you lot are failing in your duty. And if I don't do something, I'm as bad as you. And so I grabbed my bag and I stormed out, but it almost destroyed me, Leanne. I spent 2 months at home. And again, I go into it in my book, but I find it very difficult to talk about what it did to me.
Yeah.
But I finally came to the decision. I knew that by speaking out, I would lose everything, really. But if I didn't speak out...
You was going to carry that burden forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was happening in the background at that point, it was back in 2011, all the Hillsborough families were being heard for the first time. And they'd had 30 years of fighting for the truth.
Yeah.
And I sat there at home watching the telly in a complete mess, a complete mess. You know, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't make any sense of what was going on because I was very naive. I actually didn't believe. This is how naive I was. I thought then that it was one lazy police officer on the actual investigation who was blocking it. I didn't believe the chief constable knew what was going on. I didn't believe that the Home Office knew. You know,
It goes so deep, doesn't it? This
but my
corruption.
concerns were about causing the boss on that job was way out of their depth, and I didn't want to cause that individual a problem. But I had a conversation with them that made me realise, you know, I have to speak out because if I don't, this truth will come out.
Yeah.
It might be 30 years,
Yeah.
but I might be, you know, pushing up daisies. But my kids would turn the telly on and they would say, oh my God, my mum was on that job. Why didn't she say anything?
Yeah.
Really? And it was actually that thought that, you know, I can't live with myself knowing that I have done nothing. And this is the second time I've seen that. But initially, I wrote to the chief constable and he fobbed me off.
Wow.
He did not want to know. And since then, he has said things like...
What What reason did they give for wanting to focus on one and then like just basically tossing aside the rest of the?
Because it's easier.
Was there an element of the fear of the being blamed as being racism as well?
I think that was, I mean, what I have subsequently found out is that back in, I think it was 2008, the Home Office sent out a circular to all police forces not to investigate these kind of crimes. Now, you can ask why. I've got my own thoughts on it. I don't think it's quite as simple as that, Leanne. I think it's unavoidable that the ethnicity of the offenders, because they are predominantly Pakistani men, and the victims are predominantly very vulnerable young white children from often troubled backgrounds, which is what makes them vulnerable.
Yeah.
I think that is part of it. But I also believe that there is a class element to this, that, you know, these people are at the bottom. You know, I mean, you can see it now with COVID, can't you? Look at the way they're behaving.
Yeah.
You know, I came back from the Canaries. I have to quarantine. I've got to pay a fortune on tests. You've got all the UEFA officials coming into the country for nothing. You've got
G7.
You know, Matty Hancock doing whatever he's doing with his aid, and people can't even go and hold the hand of the dying parents.
I think
so it's the hypocrisy, and it's the fact it's a them and an us mentality. Well, for me, being a police officer, you deal with people equally.
Yeah.
The law...
As a person.
The law is equal. And for me, a man who rapes a child of 12 or 11 is a paedophile.
100%.
And I don't care if it's a Pakistani man. I don't care if it's a priest in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's Jeffrey Epstein or Prince Andrew. As far as I'm concerned, the law is there to deal with that and to protect the child. And when I'm being told we're not going to do that, I'm sorry. Ultimately, I ended up collapsing at work. I wrote to the chief constable. He subsequently tried to discredit me as a woman who became too emotionally involved. He's met me many times. Well, you know what? And I won't swear, but you're a liar.
Yeah.
Peter Farley has never met me to this day. You know, I became too emotionally involved. I lost my sense of perspective. No, I didn't. You told me to go and bring those kids on board. We had the evidence before we ever approached them. If we're not going to honour the commitments we make, then leave them in peace.
Yeah.
Don't go and force them to drag up. You can see, it still makes me angry.
Yeah.
It
I
still
can
does.
see the
So
passion in
I
you.
wrote to him thinking that he didn't know what was going on. How naive was I? He dismissed me, tried to send me right back down the chain. I then went through every rank. I went to the head of public protection, chief constable, head of serious crime, who threatened me. You know, because I made it very clear that I was going to deal. I was not letting this go. It's not just the police, it's the whole system.
Yeah.
And I am not walking away from this. And he said, you know, you're a police officer. You be very, very careful what you do with this information. Very clearly, you know, data protection. It's not the Official Secrets Act, but it's very similar that, you know, this data leak now that's going on with all those papers, you know, that is really, as a police officer, everything you have is confidential. But for me...
You mean when this showing all the police officers been charged and that the fact that they got away with, like, have you seen that document?
I wasn't... I was going to tell what was going on. And that is a protected disclosure in the public interest, which I know now. Back then, I didn't know. So I was terrified. But weighing up that terror against my conscience and my real determination to do what was right.
Yeah.
I accepted that whatever will be, will be. I am going to tell the truth wherever that leads. But I ended up, you know, I collapsed at work. My last day at work, I was unconscious on the floor because I just couldn't square this circle. I'd given 16 years of my life to a job that I believed in. And suddenly it's corrupt.
Yeah.
They are covering up what is truly going on. You know, but why is it only me speaking out? But, you know, I lost everything, Leanne. I lost my home. I lost my income. I lost my health, my career. I thought that I would be, you know, I didn't know then where that journey would lead. I just knew that it was wrong. And ultimately, all we have is our conscience.
Yeah.
And difficult as it can be to stand up for what's right, if you don't stand up,
It's going to come and bite you in the ass.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what's happened since then has kind of restored my faith in humanity, because most people are decent, honourable people. Many are trusting of the system, in my opinion, mistakenly so. But I was that trusting person
Yeah.
until I learned what I've learned.
Yeah.
And what I would say to everybody or anybody who sees something that's not right is have the courage to speak out, however difficult that is.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, it eats away at you. And we all have within us the ability to do that. I mean, you know, it led to obviously the drama Three Girls. I read my book, wrote my book, and then I started my own charity, the Maggie Oliver Foundation.
So I was just going to ask you about now.
Yeah, and it's the same. And the strapline of the foundation, as you know, Leanne, because you
Yeah.
came to the launch,
Yeah,
didn't you?
I did, yeah.
And you spoke, because you're a woman after my own heart.
Yeah.
You are, you know, you believe in standing up for what you believe in.
Yeah. Empowering women.
Empowering
giving them a
women
voice.
and fighting for what's right.
Yeah.
However difficult that is. But the last 10 years of my life has been almost exclusively focused on abuse.
Yeah.
On sexual abuse, on child abuse, on the failures of the system, of the corruption in the system, of sharing that truth. And there are so many victims and survivors that are on their own, that
Yeah.
don't have a voice. And as one person, I did my best. And you know, there's a lot still going on with the Rochdale girls. You know, I still support them. And we've got various legal actions ongoing.
Okay.
It's still not finished.
No.
But these are to make changes for every other victim in the country.
Of course, yeah.
And they have been so brave in allowing their case to be used for this.
Yeah.
But there are so many victims and survivors all around the country that I decided to start my own charity so that I could be joined by a team of people who share my, what's the word, desire.
Values.
My value,
Yeah.
my values of, you know,
Compassion
integrity and
as well, yeah.
compassion and non-judgmental and kindness and human decency and right and wrong, all those values in supporting those who were being squashed by the system.
Mm-hmm.
And so 2 years ago, last week, the foundation came into being.
Yeah.
We are a charity, and if anybody wants to support us,
Yeah.
go to the website, you know, the MaggieOliverFoundation.com.
So you were trying to get this some sort of centre open.
Yeah.
Have you managed to do that?
Yeah, we did. I did open a pilot centre in Rochdale just before COVID.
Yeah.
And then COVID came, and obviously I had to close it, but it was
Yeah.
a pilot centre. But one of the good things that COVID has done, it was the right thing to do, because what it did, it made me look at the base that we were building on, and it wasn't secure enough. So I rethought the path ahead, and we have launched instead, initially, a Pain into Power phone support service.
Oh yeah, I've just seen that on your Instagram actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So any survivor or victim of, it doesn't have to be, it's any adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse.
Okay.
So a child who's been abused in the family, somebody who's been raped, somebody who feels they haven't got a voice, or whether they need emotional support, whether they need help in navigating the criminal justice system, whether they have made a complaint and the police have dropped it and they feel that they're unsupported, come to us.
Okay.
And we will help you. But for those who need emotional support, we operate in a completely different way than other, say, the Samaritans, who do a great job. A survivor will ring the Samaritans. Somebody will answer the phone and they will have a conversation.
Okay.
They put the phone down if they want to speak to somebody again the following week, they ring again and they get a completely different person.
Of course, yeah.
So they keep going over that same story. And that re-traumatizes the victim. What we do, they self-refer to the foundation. We will then match them up with one of our team. We've got nearly 40 volunteer ambassadors, all trained, all beautiful people. We will match them up with one of our phone line ambassadors. And they will then have up to 8 weeks of calls. And then they drop back, but they can come back to us again. They don't disappear. We've just paid for our first group therapy course for our first group of survivors. With
Amazing.
That's not available in the NHS.
No.
So if anybody's looking for a national charity to support, again, go to the website, because we are funded almost exclusively through public donations.
Yeah.
I haven't had a penny from this. I'm doing it because I care about the fact that these services are not there for victims and survivors.
No.
We had one of our survivors on Newsnight last night. We are helping them to share their story. If the police fob them off and disengage, there are steps that a survivor or a victim can instigate, because you don't have to accept that. You can challenge it.
Yeah.
It's difficult to be heard, and different police forces are actually very different. Some police forces are better than the others. We're finding GMP that they're not in special measures for nothing. Their service in general, from what we find from our victims, is very poor. West Yorkshire Police are pretty horrifically poor. We've now got
So the phone calls, they're taken from anywhere in the country?
Anywhere.
Yeah.
Anywhere throughout the country. Any kind of childhood sexual abuse. So, and actually we are helping some rape victims as well, who were, we had one, I actually did a programme a while ago, and one of the girls who was interviewing me, she contacted us after, because she was a survivor herself. And she was a victim as a young adult. So if somebody needs help and we can help, we will. But we do need funding to grow. It is a massive problem.
Yeah.
The authorities are not equipped to offer the support. To put one of our survivors through the whole group therapy from start to finish is about £500.
Yeah.
We hope within the next year to start individual therapy. And within the next year, your question about a centre, we are going to open a centre within the next year.
Yeah.
The Maggie Oliver Centre, which will be a one-stop shop for survivors to come.
And that will be in Rochdale, will it?
No, I think we haven't finalised the details yet, because we want to make sure that everything's in place, the funding, and before we do that. But I think it's probably going to be in Manchester, so that it's accessible for people from a bigger geographical area.
Yeah.
Because we are a national charity. Because child abuse and grooming or rape or family abuse isn't just in Rochdale.
No.
It's throughout the country. So yeah, a long way to go, but we have come a long, long way.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing when you think that you look back and everything, making that decision and having the courage to do so was obviously just a very difficult one. And like you say, it's all amazing what you've achieved so far.
It's happened for a reason,
Yeah.
I always say to young people, because I do quite a lot of conferences now and public speaking, and I've done quite a bit in universities, and I always say to the people at the, in those lectures, whatever you want to call them, you are the people of tomorrow.
Yes.
Use your voice.
Yes.
Do not be silent.
Yeah.
If you see something, have the courage of your convictions. You've got to be prepared to take the rough with the smooth, and there will be people that try to destroy you or discredit you. I'd say be very careful that you try to only say things that you can prove. Mm-hmm. I still sometimes, well, not sometimes, I feel I still feel that at some point somebody will try to attack me, you know.
What, physically or
No,
just...
not physically. No, and I mean the authorities, that if
Right,
they could
yeah,
discredit me in
Yeah.
some way, they would love to.
Yeah.
So I try to only say what I can prove.
Yeah.
You know, there are lots of cases around the country. I mean, I did an interview about a case in Hull yesterday. There's a big case in Barrow that, you know.
Oh yes, I've seen the case in Barrow. Obviously, I'm from Barrow, aren't I?
Oh, of course you
are.
are.
Dalton. So yeah, I was born in Barrow. But yeah, I've heard. I did a little post, and she was actually locked away, wasn't
For a
she?
long
That little
time.
girl.
I mean, it's not come to court yet.
No.
She was in.
And the abuse and how she was beaten.
Yeah, she was in prison for about 8 months, but you know, I can't go into that detail because it is a live case,
Right.
and that is how often they get away with silencing a discussion around it. But that case will become public knowledge. I think the court case is August, as far as unless it's been put back, but it was August.
Yeah.
So that, you know, that's one case. But these failures towards victims of abuse are going on all around the country. There was a case yesterday, Hull, you know, another big case that has just been dropped. And that has been, you know, a couple of the victims of that case approached the foundation a while, well, actually one of them about a year ago. And they are in bits, you know, 2.5 years after they reported all this abuse to the police, they're told that the case has been dropped.
This is what's happening, especially with the situation and COVID, and I've spoke about from the beginning how these cases are getting up. I mean, it's hard enough anyways without COVID, but the rise in abuse in the relationships and child abuse as well, and it's just getting completely overlooked, isn't it?
Yeah.
And like you say about speaking out, I had have you seen that nurse that asks questions?
No.
She's called Jenna, and she has a placard on, and she's basically taking on, I think it's 69 cities in as well, however long it takes her, and she's basically just going around and people approaching her, asking her what it's about, and then just to try and promote and have other people to have the courage that are in the NHS or the nurses and doctors to encourage them to speak out and have the courage to do so. And obviously that's the medical side of that, but not just nurses, like whether, you know, that just the people that are in all those jobs where they're supposed to be serving the public, and actually that's not what's going on at all, is it?
And you know, it isn't, Leanne. And when you scratch the surface, you know,
and has it ever?
Power in the wrong hands is very dangerous. You know, for me, with power comes responsibility. And with responsibility, we should have accountability, and we don't.
Yeah.
You know, we have those people in power, and most of the time they are unaccountable.
100%.
And to hold them to account when the establishment protects them, you know, being that lone voice is very difficult. But I believe that the truth comes out in the end.
Of course.
You have to sometimes be patient.
Yeah.
I just see our job now, and my job as supporting victims and survivors, my main job is to share the knowledge that we have with those who wouldn't have otherwise have it.
Yeah.
In relation to abuse and the criminal justice system. This isn't just the police that's failing. I mean, you know, less than 4%, in fact, I've not got my figures, but in fact, it's not. It's less than 1.6% of reported rapes end up in court. So for every 100 rape victims that report a rape, whether that's, you know, child abuse or rape, less than 2 will see that come to court. And that isn't even accounting for those who don't report the rape. So I always say that rape and child abuse is virtually becoming decriminalised.
Yes.
It really is. And it isn't just the police. You know, it's about the whole criminal justice system. The courts are, you know, unworkable. You know, I know from barristers that there are 2 and 3 year delays in bringing cases to court.
Wow.
So if a victim of rape or abuse goes to the police, it might be 2 or 3 years. You know, it's not unusual for it to be a 2-year investigation.
No.
And then you might have 2 years to wait for court. Once that victim has named their abusers, often bail isn't being used effectively. So that victim is in the community. The abuser will know that they have already reported them to the police. You know, only yesterday I was with one victim who was targeted by her abusers. She had a whole house destroyed, set on fire, graffitied, everything, and she just built that house, and the police were approached to find her somewhere else to go, and they just, you know, slammed the door in her face.
Wow.
So when you repeatedly hear those kinds of stories, I can't put that back in my box.
No.
I have to share that truth with people who wouldn't otherwise hear it. And the police and the authorities, their main purpose is to try and discredit what me and people like me are saying. But it's not just me, it's victims, it's survivors. You know, the facts are out there. You know, GMP, when I spoke out, they didn't look at what was going on. I was saying that they weren't recording these crimes. I was saying they weren't being investigated. How many years later? 8 years later, they go into special measures because they're not recording crimes. I didn't make it up.
No.
You know, it's the truth.
Yeah.
But the entire purpose, when somebody challenges the police or challenges a powerful organisation like the police or the CPS, they all close ranks. They've got very powerful media departments, the PR department. You know, they try to discredit the person who is speaking out. Rather than addressing the problem within, they will pretend that that problem doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But I think that the cat is out of the bag when it comes to the criminal justice system. It's broken. And if we had a COVID that could attack the criminal justice system, it would be even worse than the NHS.
Yeah.
To be fair. So
I mean, I've heard some pretty shocking stories about, even like with regards to like the social workers providing paedophiles children that are being taken from families and then being sold. I did watch a bit of a documentary that was interviewing a girl that was actually pregnant and was willing to sell her baby to a bunch of paedophiles. And the paedophile, for me, the desensitizing of it and the decriminalizing it almost, and I'm hearing a lot more about that, and even like within, I don't know if you've heard in schools that they're on about, I think it's in Wales now, or going into Wales in September, the sex education that they're lowering to the age of 4, and they're actually the within that there's some very disturbing content about children pleasuring themselves and like I don't want to say too much because I know loads of them, but like bondage, like anal, like that kind of thing. You know, there's really like disturbing content in it, and there's been a pushback from parents, and apparently it's already in America, but it's coming to England, and that was one thing that's led me to want to take Lola out of school anyways and start to homeschool. But I am hearing a lot more about it, and it is very, very disturbing, and it's
it is
where we're going
world.
with it, where are we actually going with it, like hearing you talk about how it's brushed under the carpet repeatedly, how there's so many police that have been involved in these crimes that are getting away with it or being given very small sentences.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to question, you know, if you have, you know, you couldn't have an abuse case that was more clear-cut than that. You know, you've got a child who's got a statement of special educational needs.
Yeah.
We've got professional witnesses and catalogues of paperwork. You've got a fetus, so you've got no question about paternity. No. You've got a child who's willing to go to court. You've got hours of video interviews. Actually, you know, there was a policy decision that after the first interview that child would not be re-interviewed by police. It should be a psychologist. And the police overruled that in the end because it wasn't convenient. But when you have all that evidence and the chief prosecutor at the CPS choose not to charge that man with rape, I'm sorry, how more clear-cut could you... Yes, she was 13. and it's slightly different legally when you're 13. But that child.
What do you mean?
Well, the difference between if it's a child under 16 or a child under 13, the legislation is slightly different. That whatever a child under 13 says, that is absolutely. It doesn't matter what a child says. That's a statutory rape, whatever is said.
Yeah.
If you've got a child of 13 and one day and they say that I'm in a relationship, it could be viewed. It's slightly different in law.
Oh my goodness!
But a jury would still have to decide. Did this? There's all sorts of things. I mean, you can't give consent if you're drunk, if you're drugged up to the eyeballs, if you, to charge that man with sexual activity with a child straight away, the sentencing is different.
Wow.
But for me, the balance of the level of evidence needed and the charge to be brought, the weight of evidence is easier. So it's the easy option.
Yeah.
Just like for me, many of those men in Rochdale were charged with trafficking. Trafficking is far easier to prove than rape. So, those kind of considerations were taken into account in what to charge those offenders with.
Yeah.
There was only one of them that in my opinion, got a decent sentence, and that was Shabir Ahmed, called Daddy. Now, he went through 2 separate trials with 2 different kinds of abuse, and he got a reasonable sentence. All of the other abusers in that case, in my opinion, were not charged with the offences they should have been, because they raped many of the children on our list, but most of them were not charged with those multiple offences. So all of those things for me...
What did he get then? The
I think he got 19 years. But even so, when someone's sentenced to 19 years, they will only usually serve half of that sentence. The guy who got Ruby pregnant, the trial wasn't till the middle of 2012, and he was out of prison, I think it was 2015. Now, I always say if one of my sons got a 13-year-old child pregnant, he would probably go to prison for 25 years. Mm. This man had raped not just that child. He'd got one child pregnant. He'd raped many others, and we had evidence to prove that. How can he be out of prison within 3 years, 4 years?
Because they're all in it together. There's definitely.
So, it's such a never ending.
So obviously horrific, and the the courage that you've shown. But I do want to touch on something a bit more lighthearted before we come to an end of it. I want to talk about your trip, your life-changing trip that you went to Borneo, and it is in your book, and there was some funny moments in there, and just the fact that you did that and you went on your own, didn't you, with a group of people, and that takes a lot of goddamn courage. What year did you do that then, and what stage was it within the police? Was it after you left? Was it while you were?
It was actually. I'm a big believer now. I have been for quite a while in kind of tuning into your instincts, really, and. I met my husband when I was 20, and we were together until I was just before I was 50, and then he died. And we'd always liked travelling, and but when he died, he was only in his 40s, and my life really fell apart. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had my kids and I had my job. More than that, I didn't really have even any friends. I didn't have a social life. I didn't have time for it, and I actually went, I fell apart when he died. I kept it together to get the kids back to school. And then I used to go to he'd been treated at Christie's. And over the period he was 2.5 years terminally ill. And we used to go back, he used to have his chemotherapy. And we got to know the research nurses there really, really well. And even after he died, I'd go back with a tin of biscuits, and I'd go and get a brew, and I'd go. There was a Julie, and there was there was three of them, actually. There was three of them that had become very close, and I just didn't know what to do with myself, really. And I went back this particular day, and I'm there having my brew, and I've got a biscuit, and Norman died of bowel cancer. And one of the nurses said, I was thinking about you today. So she disappeared, and she came back in, and she brought this poster, and it was a charity trek to Borneo for beating bowel cancer.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Right? And the first day of the trek would have been Norman's 50th birthday. It was bowel cancer that he died of, and it ended a year to the day after he died. And I just thought, you know what, there's kind of a sign there.
Yeah, 100%.
It would give me a purpose.
Yeah.
And so I signed up. And that year after he died, probably about 9 months of it, me and the kids, and we just threw ourselves into raising funds for beating, because we had to raise a certain amount of money. I raised about $5,500.
Wow.
And then a year later, I had to, go to the airport at Manchester, and I was flying to London to meet the other people who were doing the trek, and it was going through the jungle in Borneo, and I mean the jungle. It wasn't a pretend jungle.
Yeah, when you spoke about it in the book, I went to Kenya, and and that was
you did China as well, didn't you?
And China, the Wall of China.
The Wall of China.
But, like Kenya was another level of, but actually nothing like being in the jungle in Borneo. I mean,
and it really was. We had somebody who fell over a ravine. We had somebody who dislocated the shoulder. Somebody else who broke the knee. There was, I think there was 13 of us, including an army doctor and the trek organizer. And there was meant to be another trek after the one we did. We were the first non-Borneo trekkers to do that route, and they cancelled they didn't do it again. But I got
surprised.
It was, and then we climbed Mount Kinabalu, which is the highest mountain in Southeast Asia, and I do go into this in my book.
Yeah, it is really good.
I wasn't. I'm fit.
Yeah,
but there was no way I was fit enough to do that. But that experience, when I got to Manchester Airport, I just broke down in tears. I thought, I can't do this. I was going to go home, and I rang my sister actually at the time. I said, I can't do it. She said, look, get on the phone, on the plane, and go to London. And when you meet the rest of the group, if you still feel that way, just come home. So I got on the plane and I went to London. All my makeup had run. Got to London, met the other people in the...
Can't imagine you on the mountain with you not a blow dry and your face full of makeup.
There's a picture in the book where we're like drowned rats, But getting, the jungle was one thing. Then climbing the mountain, bear in mind it's a tropical climate, so you'd walk for an hour and then it'd be torrential rain. We had to spend the night, from about 10 at night till about 3 in the morning in like a hostel, like a hut. We got up at 3 in the morning, and then we had the final charge to the top of the mountain, and we got there at sunrise. And
I did that the other day. It snowed and I got to the top and it was cloudy. I didn't see anything.
Did you?
I was gutted. That was tough enough.
Well, we were above the clouds, and I remember getting to the top of that mountain, like all our, paraphernalia on, looking like a drowned rat. And I'd taken a picture of Norman with me, like wrapped in a plastic bag, a little, like an IKEA thing. Got to the top of the mountain and all the clouds are there below us, the sunrise coming. And I remember, as though it was yesterday, looking down where we'd come from, standing there with his picture, crying my eyes out by the, whatever you call it, the spike at the top, and thinking, right, he wouldn't want me to just give up. Because I thought I'd just be a mum, a grandma, work, that was it.
Yeah.
He wouldn't want that.
Yeah.
And I am going to go down the other side, and I am going to live my life.
Yeah.
And I am going to do my best. And I'm going to, live for two of us. And it really was a life. I was nearly
pivotal point in your life.
Massively. But what it really taught me was the power of your mind over matter. Because physically, nobody was prepared for that.
Yeah.
I was the oldest one in that group. Even the 25-year-olds couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But there was no way I was not getting to the top of that mountain.
Yeah.
And it nearly killed me. but I got there. And so it just taught me that if you
how strong
really
you actually are.
If you really, really set your mind to something,
You can do it.
You can do it. And I look at my journey since the end of 2012, 2013 when I spoke out. I thought, I lost everything. I lost my family home and my income, my job, my career. And I look at, and I accepted that. But I look at where I've come from then. And I couldn't have planned it. Nobody knows what's around the corner.
No.
All you have is your own determination, your own self-belief. And self-belief is powerful. So it was a big lesson in life, and it's probably a lesson that I needed to do what I've done since.
Yeah.
And I didn't go into this to fight a war. I just went into it to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And that has kind of followed me.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who haven't had the opportunity to use their voice.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel a responsibility to carry on sharing their stories.
Yeah.
And there is strength in numbers. Knowledge is power. I'm just trying to share their stories with other people who have got the ability to change things, and I think eventually we will win.
Yeah.
So that's
Definitely.
kind of, where...
Definitely. And I'm sure Norman will be looking down and be very, very proud of you.
He'll be shaking his
Yeah,
head. He'll be
yeah.
going, what are you doing now?
No, he'll be cheering you on. I'm sure he's been by your side at every step anyway.
He has been there.
Yeah,
He definitely has been there.
Definitely.
Watching over me.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and telling
it's been a
your
pleasure,
story.
Leanne.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just keep going, and hopefully you'll just keep making the foundation bigger and helping more and more girls and bringing light on the shadow of the world and the corruption that is just
out there,
been going on for far too long. So let's pray for that.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thanks, Leanne. It's been lovely talking
Thank
to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. If you are watching from YouTube, don't forget to click the notifications button, like and subscribe, and also from Spotify. We'll see you next week.